Welcome back to Anime Lockdown. It's my pleasure to introduce to you anime commentary with the panel, The Robot in Anime. The floor is yours.
Hey, good to be back. As mentioned, this will be about brief history of the robot in anime and some of the key productions that were released starting in the 1960s. The robot in anime has a storied history. Some of the stuff started in World War II, to be exact. The next panel. First, might be good to define what exactly is a robot. A robot, strictly speaking, is a construct made entirely of manufactured parts. A cyborg, by contrast, is made of biomechatronic parts and organic chemistry. If you've ever seen Cyborg from DC Comics, he would technically qualify as a cyborg. Traditional robots were usually mechanical. Later robots started including electronics and thus broadening the definition. Real examples of robots include Osamu. Some of the earliest examples include Electro, who was demonstrated at the 1939 World's Fair. He had a 78 RPM record that had a set collection of phrases that he would say. Next panel, this is some of the early history of the robot in general. Some of the earliest robots debuted in the 19th century, such as the Steam Man of the Prairies. The first usage of the term robot was in a Czech play from the 1920s. That play included robots that were organic clones of people rather than mechanical parts. As the years went on, we started seeing some classic examples of robots, such as the villainous robot in Metropolis. Next panel, going into the 1940s and 1950s, we start seeing more sympathetic portrayals of robots, such as Gorg, the assistant to Kyatto in The Day the Earth Stood Still. B-movie pictures such as Robot Monster typically presented them still as villains, but that would all change with the introduction of Star Wars in 1977, where the androids all have complex motivations and personalities. Next panel, going into the 1980s, cyberpunk introduced a lot of core concepts you see now, such as the dystopian society. Blade Runner 1982 introduced the replicants, who are agitating for recognitions as equals to humans, although humans in films like these historically have been pretty dismissive of the robots. And now modern stuff includes stuff like Nier Automata, Big Hero 6, and all that. Next panel, with anime specifically, we started seeing the earliest examples in World War II, as I mentioned. Some popular fiction of the time. Manga was not really developed that much during World War II because a lot of the popular media at the time had been subsumed into the propaganda machine to present Japanese military as superior to the West. But once the war concluded and Japan was defeated, robots in fiction started becoming more human-like in their characteristics and more sympathetic. Next panel. Here are some examples of early robots. This includes Kaijin Roboto and Denki Dako, which is shown on the left, which is an octopus mech. The octopus, oddly, is a kind of a popular image with space operas and science fiction, as I think that originated with the War of the Worlds, with the Martians. The Martian, more the world left an enduring image of the octopus on Japanese pop culture. Next panel, going into the 1960s, we start seeing the first major anime productions for television. One of the first was 8-Man. This was a manga by Kazumasa Hirai and Jiro Kawada. He's called that because he was the 8th subject of an experiment to give him superhuman strength and speed. He would be eclipsed in popularity by, next panel, Astro Boy, one of Osamu Tezuka's most popular manga. The story revolves around a scientist whose son dies in a car accident, and he constructs an android to replace him, but he later sells the robot Astro to a circus where he is later adopted by another professor. This show is very historically significant for introducing the idea of the sympathetic robot character in manga, and it also was one of the first shows to feature merchandising and sponsorship. Tezuka knew that he could only reduce the cost of animation so much, and he had to rely on outside funding to support his projects. And in this case, he got sponsorship from the AG Confectionery Company, which featured Astro on their candy labels. Next panel, Gigantor. Gigantor is the first true mech in anime, debuted the same year as the Astro Boy anime. What's unusual about Gigantor is that he is operated externally via remote rather than via pilot in a cockpit like you see in later productions. And also, uniquely, we do not have an overarching antagonist for this series. Most of the people who try to capture Gigantor don't last more than 2 to 3 episodes. Next panel, another key series, Cyborg 009. Created by the same guy who achieved popularity with Kamen Rider and Super Sentai. The villainous Black Ghost organization abducts several people of different nationalities to experiment on. And the one Japanese person, Joe Shimamura, is the protagonist, and he becomes Cyborg 009. Next panel. I mentioned this one in my History of Shonen Jump panel, but worth mentioning here. Mazinger Z, one of Go Nagai's most popular works alongside stuff like Devilman. This introduced the super robot genre to the world. The super robot genre typically includes a giant robot that is the product of either a mad scientist or an advanced legendary civilization that has unique special abilities. For example, Mazinger Z has the Rocket Punch. The Rocket Punch originated with Mazinger Z and countless manga and anime since 1972 pay homage to the classic Rocket Punch technique. It also includes the idea of courage and sacrifice, as the pilot of Mazinger Z protects Earth against the invading forces of Dr. Hell in the case of Mazinger Z. Next panel. This one is Doraemon. Doraemon is a pretty popular character. He's a robot cat from the 22nd century who has a special fourth dimensional pouch that allows them to extract numerous items that will be handy in any given situation. The first anime that adaptation of Doraemon fared very poorly. It had poor animation, and it got destroyed pretty much. They started over with another series that became more popular. Now Doraemon has numerous movies to his credit over the years. Next panel, Gatchaman. This one got released in American television as renamed as Battle of the Planets. But I'm going to talk about the original Gatchaman here. Not that many robots appear in this series. The first episode features the Turtle King. While the main antagonist, the leader of Galactor, is an artificial intelligence. Next panel, Casshan. This is one of many Tatsunoko productions at the time. Tatsunoko was pretty prolific. At the time, it had stuff like Gold Lighton, Yatterman, a lot of stuff that was you may recognize. Casshan features a cyborg, who's an android who is equipped with human consciousness. Anyway, speaking about Doraemon, I see the question. Doraemon, I'm not sure if was ever released legally in the United States. Nothing was ever published or released. And as far as Casshan, yes, this is Casshan. Casshan and Casshan are all various spellings of the same thing. With Casshan, the father of Tetsuya Azuma, the main character, he built his first android BK-1, who rebelled against him and became the primary antagonist. Next panel, Leiji Matsumoto. Maybe people might remember him for Galaxy Express 39. This was a key manga because it helped introduce the idea of social stratification based upon wealth distribution. The wealthiest members of society have access to robot bodies. The poor are suffering and languishing in the lower depths of the city. The main character, Tetsuro Hoshino, wants to receive a robot body, but he can't afford one. However, he hears of a legendary train 39 that travels to a distant planet that he will receive a robot body for free. He manages to get a ticket through the assistance of Maital, who you see on the right. This connects a little bit with some of Leiji Matsumoto's other work, like Captain Harlock. You occasionally see the two interact. Next panel, Mobile Suit Gundam. This is the first real robot genre show. Unlike Super Robot, Real Robot demonstrates a more realistic military approach to mobile suits and robots. In this case, they're mobile suits. The average soldier receives mass-produced units with mass-produced weapons, while the special high-ranking members of the military, who are called new types, receive their own unique units. It helped establish Yoshiyuki Tomino's career as a prominent mecha designer. He had previously worked on shows like Voltus 5 or Raiden, but this was the first show that really made him popular as a director. It also helped establish the concept of the Char clone. All subsequent Gundam shows have their own variation of Char Aznable. Char was the primary antagonist of Mobile Suit Gundam. He also appears in Zeta and then Char's counterattack. Examples of Char clones would include Iron Mask Rona in F91 and Miliardo Peacecraft, aka Zaxxon Keys in Gundam Wing. Next panel. These are other examples of 70s robot productions that were around at the time. Most of them are Super Robot, like Voltus 5, I mentioned that one, Dangar Ace. Most of them feature some type of a single unit fighting against what is usually an alien invasion. Next panel. Here's some more examples from the same decade. As you can see, they're pretty unique designs. The Go Up a 5 Godam. I think that was the one that was unique that has the first female protagonist. The female pilot. You'll start seeing more and more female pilots as time goes on. And get a Robo. Another popular one at the time. Next panel, going into the 1980s, the Super Robot format still fairly popular at the time, but it would not last. The popularity would not last for very long. It would decline by the end of the decade. Gundam would become very popular at this time with stuff like the Zeta Gundam, Double Zeta, and Char's Counterattack, showing how Gundam became the preeminent series for mechs. Next panel, to give an example of what Yoshiyuki Tomino was doing at the time in the 1980s, Space Runaway Ideon. This was an example of a mech that is a combination of 3 vehicles, each given a separate pilot. They would combine to form the giant robot you see here. As you see here, the Buff Clan is another school alien invasion story. What's interesting that it results in the Supreme Commander of the military being destroyed. And sure thing, thriller, spoil away. Next panel. Beast King Golion. People might recognize Beast King Golion as the first few episodes of Voltron. Voltron was a combination of both Golion and Die Ruger 15. They combined the 2 series to make Voltron because syndication requirements meant the show needed at least 65 episodes to qualify for syndication. The same thing happened with Robotech, as we'll see later. Next panel. I also mentioned this one in my my Shonen Jump panel, but Dr. Slump. This is the first major work by Akira Toriyama. He will go on to achieve even greater success with Dragon Ball. The main android here is Arale Norimaki, the creation of Senbei. This is about the various misadventures of Senbei and Arale. They live in Penguin City, which occasionally appears in Dragon Ball. One of the characters who makes an occasional recurring appearance in there is a Superman parody named Supaimon. He receives the name because Supai means sour, and he eats a sour umeboshi to transform into Supaimon. Next panel, Go Shogun. This is a unique one because the chief writer for Pokemon worked on this series, and the director for pretty much all the Pokemon movies worked on this as well. Um, one sort of fairly common element that it shares with other mecha anime of the decade is that the main character loses his father. In this case, Professor Sonata commits suicide to avoid his information being falling into the hands of the enemy, leaving his son an orphan. Next panel, another Yoshiyuki Tomino production, Xabungle. This is another one featuring an orphan protagonist. He lost both his parents when they got murdered. Yoshiyuki Tomino's name will appear in several stuff during the 80s, so you'll see him a lot here. Next panel, one that probably few people recognize, Super Dimension Fortress Macross. Macross is notable for having mechs that have various modes. They have the Valkyrie units. They can transform into planes. And it's also notable for being the first saga of Robotech. Robotech is sort of a weird legal issue regarding who has the rights to Macross and then distribute them overseas, which is why we've not really seen any stuff get a legal distribution aside from the original Macross. Next series, next panel, Genesis Climber MOSPEADA. This is one of the other series that got incorporated in the Robotech, the third being Southern Cross. Earth becomes a major player here. Again, alien invasion. The person who provided the score for this show had also produced stuff for Takashi Kitano's films and Studio Ghibli Productions, Joe Hisaishi. So overall, good score. Next panel, Giant Gorg. Giant Gorg is somewhat unique in that rather than having an alien invasion as the premise, the aliens have resided on Earth in cryogenic stasis for nearly 30,000 years as they awaited for humans to achieve technological advancement. The aliens suddenly resurface when the island New Austral reemerges from a volcanic eruption, and the son of a scientist managed to find Giant Gorg and meet one of the representatives of the alien race. Next panel, one that probably everybody is familiar with by this point, Transformers. Transformers is the combination of two separate toy lines, Diaclone and Microman. The basic story is the Autobots, their leader is Optimus Prime. They arrive on Earth and then they defend it from the villainous Decepticons led by Megatron. A kind of sort of recurring joke in Transformers that Starscream always wants to replace Megatron as the leader of the Decepticons. Each Transformer has a vehicle mode. For example, Optimus Prime is a semi-truck. Megatron is one of the few non-vehicles. He transforms into a gun in his alternate mode and is carried wherever he goes by another Decepticon in his gun form. Next panel, Bubblegum Crisis. This began as a series of OVAs. They originally wanted 13 episodes, but they couldn't continue with the production cost, so they only produced 8. The robots in this series are known as boomers. The boomers are the Night Sabers, consist of an all-female troupe of defenders who go around dealing with rogue boomers who have gone insane for somehow. It has a remake, whatever of sorts, called Tokyo 2040, and which is a 26 episode series, and the characters are redesigned for there. And the antagonist for the Tokyo 2040 is Galatea, and she herself is a clone of a person who provided the DNA for the boomers. Next panel, Dragon Ball Z. I mentioned Dragon Ball Z specifically because this is the section of the Dragon Ball franchise that features the androids, specifically 16, 17, and 18. The androids are the creation of Dr. Gero, who transformed himself into Android 20. 18, as people might know, she eventually turns good and she marries Krillin, and they have a child together. Later on, you will see the introduction of Android 21 and Super, because the androids are still around. Next panel. Some other examples of 80s productions. As I said, a few of these are super robot stuff. Shiriko Robogalad is an example of a super robot show. Most of these involve, as mentioned, alien invasion, so they're not very... that basic premise of alien invasion happens a lot. Next panel. Let's see. Other 80s stuff, and as I mentioned, Gundam. This is a very prolific period for Gundam. We mentioned Zeta, Double Zeta. Skipping ahead to slide 34, going into the 90s. The 90s was a period of economic decline for Japan. The industry was kind of in a slump because of the economic decline. The bubble had burst by 1989, and thus a lot of the industries that were once prominent in the 1980s were suffering. Next panel. If this is the one I'm thinking of. It's Kyatto, Ninden, Teyandee. People might recognize this series as by its American name, Samurai Pizza Cats. It features a group of cyborg cats who work as employees at a pizza restaurant most of the time, but they're also deployed as ninjas who protect the city of Eteropolis against the villainous fox Kitsunesuke Koen no Kami and his ninja crew subordinates. It's more of a comedy show, you might expect. Next panel. Mobile Fighter G Gundam. This was the first Gundam series to be set in a timeline other than Universal Century. There were 3 series that were produced during this decade that were in an alternate universe. In regards to G Gundam, it maintains the idea of space colonies, but here each colony sends a representative mecha pilot to a tournament held every 4 years, and the winner of the tournament gets to rule all the space for the next 4 years. Domon Kashu is the representative for Japan. he rides the God Gundam, the Shining Gundam, and the God Gundam, and he was taught by Master Asia, who represents Hong Kong, and he's looking for his missing brother Kyoji, who turns out is the pilot of the Devil Gundam. Next panel, Mobile Suit Gundam Wing. This is the second of 3 shows. The third one being Gundam X. Gundam Wing saw a lot of popularity on Cartoon Network in the 90s. It features the United Earth Sphere Alliance, Oz, and the various space colonies who were agitating for independence. The character Hiro Yui, the one who pilots Wing, is named after the former leader of the space colonies who was assassinated. As I mentioned, this has its own char clone. It's Zex Marquise, aka Miliardo Peacecraft, who was one of those few survivors of the assault on the Saint Kingdom, and he wants to revenge his fallen comrades in the Saint Kingdom. Next panel, probably the biggest one of this decade, Neon Genesis Evangelion. It's difficult to overstate Evangelion's importance on the anime industry. A lot of people were rather upset about the final 2 episodes of this series, which resulted in End of Evangelion being produced. Evangelion helped pretty much save the struggling industry, and reruns of Evangelion helped popularize the late night anime format, and otaku culture became much more widespread as a result of Evangelion's success. Rei Ayanami became an archetypal character, and subsequent shows such as Martian Successor Nadesco had their own similar character in the roster. Next panel, Ghost in the Shell. I put this in the 90s because of the first film. The manga was released in the late 80s, specifically 1989. It features the iconic character Toko Kusanagi, field commander for Public Sector Security 9. The first Ghost in the Shell film features the antagonist known as the Puppet Master. Ghost in the Shell was famous for its philosophical ruminations on self-identity. A lot of the film discusses the fact that this is a world where one can alter one's identity at will. The Puppet Master shows that one can transplant one's consciousness into different robots, and thus the idea of identity is mutable. Next panel, Martian Successor Nadesco. This is a sort of half comedic, half serious series featuring a war between the Jovian lizards and Earth. One unique element of this series is that both the Jovians and the Earthlings have a fondness for the show Gekigator 3, which is a throwback to early 70s mecha shows. Guy Daigoji particularly is a big fan of the show, and he promotes the series to his comrades aboard the Nadesco. Next panel, Saber Marionette. Saber Marionette was created by the guy who wrote the manga for Sakura War, and they just released a new game for Sakura Wars recently, so it's timely. The basic premise of Saber Marionette, as you can see here, is that after Earth begins space colonization, the spaceship, the Mesopotamia crash, lands on another planet, and they start rebuilding society on that planet, but they don't have any women, so they start building androids as a replacement. But the robots suffer discrimination because the human inhabitants see them as subservient. Next panel, Cyber Team and Akihabara. The guy behind Saber Marionette J also produced this series. Akihabara is a section of Tokyo famous for his electronics stores. It's a haven for electronics buffs. This is a sort of magical world show, or more of a pet show like Pokemon, where the junior high student receives a robot pet known as a Potopi, which can be improved upon with various electronic shops, which is why Akihabara features so prominently in the series. Next panel, AD Police. This is a side story featured in the same universe as Bubblegum Crisis. Received a TV series in 1999. Rather than boomers, we get Voomers, which is the product of the company Genome. They provide the Voomers as a means of helping Tokyo recover. But like Bubblegum Crisis, these robots start malfunctioning, going wild. Next panel, the Big O. The Big O, it was the head writer for the show, had worked on Serial Experiments Lane, Hellsing, all that. So good history there. They originally wanted 26 episodes of this series, but only got to 13 episodes because of a poor reception in Japan. But the show's popularity overseas led to a second season, partially financed by Cartoon Network. This shows that as anime became more popular overseas, American studios are starting to finance projects such as Big O, and showing that there are a market for this in other countries besides Japan. Next panel, One Piece. This is one of the very long-running series for Shonen Jump. The second most popular series. This is the most popular series ever created in manga history. The robot element comes into play with, especially Frankie. Frankie is a cyborg. It also includes Bartholomew Kuma and his pacifista clones. That's why I include One Piece. That's why I included One Piece, because it technically does have robots, even though they're not the primary focus of the series. Next panel. Some examples of other examples of 90s anime featuring robots. Includes stuff like F91, Victory Gundam. This was also the decade, I think, of Stardust Memory, some of the OVAs. Next panel. This also includes stuff like Metabots, also Turn A Gundam, which was an attempt to connect all the disparate universes together into one series. Is notable. Turn A is notable for its for mecha designs by Sid Meier, who worked on Blade Runner. Next panel, now going into the 2000s. 2000s. Then this is the time of stuff like Van Dread, Blast Rider, as we see here. I include Wally as an example of an American series that prominently featuring a robot. Next panel. First one here from the 2000s is Van Dread, directed by the same guy who worked on Gunsmith Cats and Category Orange Road. Kind of a funny story involving the men and women are two sides of an ongoing conflict. They both inhabit different planets, but the men see the women as hideous monsters intent on their destruction. That's what the propaganda presents them as, but they soon realize that they're fellow humans. Next panel. This is a Tezuka production, Metropolis. It's very loosely based on the German film of the same name. This is based on a Tezuka manga. It shows that we're starting to see more, older stuff being adapted into film, even as late as 2001. Older stuff being adapted, I'll mention that later on in the 2010s, but this is Metropolis. Next panel. Chobits. This is a clamp work, the only one I think of where it's specifically targeting men, male demographic. The term Chobits, anyway, the Persicoms in the manga are advanced androids that function as computers. She is unique in that she is a custom model that doesn't have an OS, but she is still able to function as a regular computer. Next panel, Full Metal Panic. Full Metal Panic by Shoji Gatto. It's a light novel series. It got adapted into an anime. The sequel series, Second Raid, was the first major production done by Kyoto Animation. They also produced Fumofu. It features a special group of people known as the Whispered. A Soviet experiment in the 1980s went awry, resulting in a select group of people being able to produce technology far in advance of what is shown in the show. And one of them is Kanami Chidori. Next panel, the Animatrix. I mentioned the Animatrix specifically because this is the anime series they made in connection with the Matrix. It primarily features robots, and each segment has a separate director. The second Renaissance was separated into two parts, and it was created by the guy who did Blue Submarine #6 and Gankutsuo, and it illustrates the history of the Robot Rebellion, which sets the background for the events of the Matrix series. Next panel, Diebuster. Diebuster is a sequel to Gunbuster, and it shows what happens to the pilots at the end of the Gunbuster series. It was produced to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Gainax. Next panel, a fairly popular anime from the time, Code Geass. It has character designs from the artist at Clamp, and the story revolves around three main superpowers, one of them being the Holy Britannia Empire, whose exiled prince is Lelouch. The Britannian Empire conquers Japan, and the robots in these series are the autonomous armored knights, or the Nightmare Freight. Next panel, another fairly popular series, Gurren Lagann. The director and head writer of the series would go on to create Kill la Kill, and more recently, Promare. Which is why they have stylistic similarities. The series Gurren Lagann features the various disparate human colonies that live underground who are ruled by Lord Gino. The main character, Simon, is one of the inhabitants of these villages, and he discovers the small mecha, the head-shaped mecha, in a core drill while he's excavating. Next panel, giving some more examples of anime. This was also the era of Gundam Seed. As mentioned, Fumofu, Gravion. Next panel, some other ones. Another example would be Raza Maiden, which is a story about these living dolls. Next, mention Macross. The whole weirdness about Macross is the weird legal issues surrounding Harmony Gold, who claims copyright of the Macross designs, and they're very defensive about it. And thus we've never really had a proper release. Am I doing all right? Can you hear me? Okay. Going into slide 60, going ahead to slide 60, now the immediately previous decade. The 2010s, I'm only going to cover maybe a few, maybe like 5 or 6 in this decade, just to give a few examples. Next panel, panel 61, keep track. Infinite Stratos is a modern example. It was unusual in that the show presents the Infinite Stratos units as only being able to be piloted by women. The show focuses around the sole male pilot who manages to enter the academy for Infinite Stratos pilots. Next panel, Mobile Suit Gundam Age. This is an example of a modern Gundam series. This is the 12th series to be produced in the franchise. It's separated into 4 distinct arcs. The first 3 focus on specific characters, and then they finally meet in the 4th arc, and it combines all 4 disparate arcs. Next panel, brief mention this one, Nichijou. I mentioned this one because it has the character known only as the Professor or Nakaze in the original Japanese, who is a 8-year-old scientist who built the robot Nano Shinonome, who has a superfluous key on her back. This professor is known for being a sort of a mecha nut herself. Next panel, Gundam Reconguista in G, the show that was produced to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Gundam franchise. It's set in the Re-Guild century, as you can see here. That's the reorganized calendar after the correct century concluded. That was turn A. So this is an example of a modern Gundam series. And to round it off, next panel, Gridman. Gridman's a fun one because this is part of the Giant Hero franchise. The Giant Hero franchise includes Ultraman, and Gridman itself is a reinterpretation of an 80s series also called Gridman, which is why it has a robot design that looks quite similar to the Ultraman character. Anyway, next panel. I'll conclude it here. This is just examples of other stuff from the 2010s. There's stuff like within Marduk Scramble, Lagrange, robotics notes, and all that. Anyway, that's my panel. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll take questions, sure.
We'll see if anybody. Sorry, it looks like my mic was potted down. Yeah, if anybody in the chat has any questions, we have about 10 more minutes for this panel. Looks like some people are applauding, so that's cool.
Even though a lot of the shows tend to have a lot of the characters dying in combat, especially with Gundam.
Well, let's see. What's your personal opinion of Tomino? You may have just answered that. Sorry, I was fixing another. There's a technical thing going on over here, so I got a little distracted. Cool. Well, thank you so much for the panel.
Thank you.
We hope that you have a pleasant rest of your day.